Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I am Lendy Ruano, and I am with Eastern Sales of Southern California and the Disability Tribe Initiative. Today's webinar, Empowering People with Developmental Disabilities to Make Informed Life Decisions, is offering ASL and Spanish interpretation. For those in need of Spanish interpretation, please click on the white globe at the bottom of the screen labeled Interpretation. Then click Spanish and you will have the choice to mute original audio. You will then be able to hear Aldo Renteria provide a live and simultaneous interpretation of the webinar. In the Spanish channel, if you select Mute Original Audio, you will only hear the interpreter. Otherwise, if you don't select Mute Original Audio, you will still be able to hear the English presenters in the background. Our ASL interpreters are Betty McQuena and Caitlin Dodgham. They have been spotlighted so they can always be seen throughout the presentation. Depending on your device, this may mean that sometimes you cannot see the presenters. We do apologize for the inconvenience, but we want to make sure that this live meeting and recording can be accessible to everyone. This presentation will have closed captioning, which you can access using the button at the bottom of the screen. A few things to note about Zoom before we get started. Next slide, please. This meeting is being recorded to allow us to refer back to the discussion today and input we receive. You can hear and see us, but we cannot hear and see you. Everyone has been automatically put on mute and your camera is not on. Chat is not activated for attendees. However, presenters will be sharing information through the chat during the webinar. If you would like to ask a question or provide a comment, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We also ask that you indicate which presenter you would like to send the question to. We have staff monitoring and responding as necessary. Some questions will be answered in real time. Some will be saved for the live Q&A at the end. Or we may ask for your email address so we can follow up with the more thorough answer after the webinar. For those of you on a phone or a device, you may not be able to use all of the features we discussed. We will be providing other options for you to access materials or ask questions later in the webinar. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we will be asking you to participate in our post survey. Once the webinar is over, a new window will pop open with the survey. Please provide your feedback so we can improve on future events. It is now my pleasure to introduce Barry Giardini, Executive Director of the Californian Disability Services Association. Barry?
Thank you so much, Lendy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are thrilled to present the next webinar in our webinar series for the Disability Thrive Initiative. And today's is, I think, a very timely presentation, as well as going to be very interesting for the attendees. So we're really glad you're here with us today. We are going to have a webinar on empowering people with disabilities to make informed life decisions. Thriving during the pandemic is all about balancing risk and priorities, but what's the process for doing that? Today, we're going to have a panel presentation by John Rafael, the Director of Educational Services from the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, to give us an overview on the informed decision-making process and to answer some questions like why having choice is important for people with disabilities, even when there is risk, the vital role that direct support professionals and family caregivers play in supporting choice, and how to empower personal decisions about alternative services and the COVID-19 vaccination. So it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you today our panelist, our presenter, John Rafael from NADSP. We will then follow that with a panel discussion from members of the IDD community. So John, thank you so much and take it away.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you, everybody. I wish I was with you in California. I'm in New York right now, As Barry said, I'm the Director of Educational Services at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. We are obviously a national organization that's devoted to bringing direct support professionals the recognition and the skills and ultimately the status they deserve. And one thing that we know direct support professionals do, and they do it well, if they're doing it well, they do informed decision making all the time, helping people make informed decisions. They do this all the time. And that is a lot easier said than done. I have to say that today it's about 6 o'clock my time. It's 3 o'clock your time on the West Coast. Again, I'm in New York. I've made probably dozens of decisions today that I've taken for granted. And that said, sometimes when even a person that doesn't have a learning disability, a developmental disability, an intellectual disability, we have problems making decisions as human beings. And I think when people have those kinds of disabilities where there's processing issues, communication issues, whatever else it might be part of that disability, sometimes decision making, we take it for granted. But we have to have a couple very clear before we even begin the content. A couple premises. One, everybody on this planet should have the right to make their own decisions and direct the course of their own life. Number two, we have to understand that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have been actually prevented from that dignity of decision making. We're going to talk about that and why that we need to change that, and how this is a complicated thing, this thing about informed decision making and making choices. So next slide, please. What we want to do by the end of our time together, and especially when we have some discussion with some very esteemed panelists, we want to get into what is informed decision making? What is it? But also, what isn't it? I think there's a notion that we have almost a responsibility, a job function as a direct support professional to kind of make decisions for people. That, believe it or not, that's a notion, and that's the wrong notion. And we want to get away from that. Direct support professionals we're not here to make decisions for people. We're here to help people make their own decisions with assistance and support. Number two, having choice is important for everybody. But once again, when we look at the history of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, what we find is we have systematically taken that away from people for whatever reasons. And we'll talk about that very briefly. Direct support professionals have a huge role in helping people with this part of life about making decisions. I wish I had somebody today several times to help me make decisions. I didn't have that. I don't have that. People that get support from direct support professionals, they have that option. They have that, I wouldn't say it's a luxury, but they have that resource. And we have to be careful to make sure we take care of that resource and help people understand what your role is in helping somebody make a decision. And it's a lot more complicated than that, as we're going to see. And how can we best support people in making their own decisions? And that I'm only going to talk about a little less than a half hour now. There's a lot of moving parts to that. And what we want to do in the course of our short time together in my short presentation to you, give you kind of the basics of what we believe at the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals, what we believe, especially the role of the direct support professional, what is the responsibility and what is the function of helping somebody make a decision. So let's get to it. Next slide, please. So let me tell you about a decision I made this morning. I made coffee. I drink coffee, and had coffee, and I use half and half in my coffee. And I poured half and half in the coffee, and it curdled. It curdled. So it was all disgusting. And I'm like, oh man, this is not a good way to start the day. And so I had to make a decision. It sounds like a little decision, but I made this decision. You know what? I'm going to forego coffee. The heck with it. I don't want to have coffee. And so what I'm going to have is I'm going to have a glass of water and, some juice. And I chose that. About 1 o'clock my time, 2 o'clock my time, guess what happened? Headache. I made the decision to not have coffee, and I guess I must be addicted to the caffeine in the coffee, and I wound up getting a headache, and I took an aspirin and I'm fine now. But see, that's a decision that I made. And although the consequences of the decision, not huge, every decision we make, every decision as a human being that we make has some kind of effect, some kind of consequence, maybe a big consequence, maybe a little one. For me, it was a little one. I got a headache because I didn't drink coffee. By the way, tomorrow morning, I went out and got half and half. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have my coffee with half and half, and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm not going to get a headache, hopefully later in the day. What does this have to do with, why do we need a training on making decisions or helping people make informed decisions? I said it before, I'll say it again. We have a whole curriculum that's devoted to this. How do we teach direct support professionals specifically? How do we teach them to best help people in their decision-making process? Because here is the very harsh truth. We have taken away that level of choice systematically for people with disabilities in our history. I think we're getting a little better at it, but we have a lot of territory to cover in the future. For instance, when you think about the way in which we housed people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the 40s and the 50s and even to the 60s and 70s, we warehoused people, literally. You know that in California. You had your institutions. I'm from New York. We're the state that brought you the largest institution in the world, a place called Willowbrook. And it was in places like that where people's decision-making capacities, their ability to have choice in their own life were stripped. And when we look at that, when we look at people that don't have the diagnosis of an intellectual or developmental disability, the kind of the freedom we have to make our own choices without some kind of supervision or some kind of control. And when we look at the world of supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities historically, we never allowed for that. We didn't allow people to take risks. We segregated people. We segregated people with intellectual disabilities to begin with from our communities, put them in warehouses, right? These horrible places. Then even there, we would segregate people, male and female. We would segregate by gender. We would systematically sterilize. We would take away reproductive rights of people with disabilities just by the virtue of them having that particular diagnosis. So systematically, historically, this is a new frontier for us in terms of, here I go, I'll use this, here's the quotes, and I'm sorry, interpreters, I'm doing this quoting thing. I don't know if this is ASL quote. We're going to allow for people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities from here forth to make their own decisions, right? We're going to allow for this. And I don't like that word, and that's really the wrong word to use, but the reality is there's something called the Home and Community-Based Services Final Settings Rule, Community Settings Rule. You probably, if you don't know about it, you're going to learn about it eventually. It's essentially our funders have said to us, the provider community in the United States that receives Medicaid funding, you need to provide our communities, you need to allow for more choices and more opportunities for risk for people with developmental disabilities if you're going to receive our money anymore. There's a lot more to that. We could have a whole webinar devoted to that, and hopefully, the California Disabilities Service Association might do one of those webinars in the future. But the reality is, time has come for us to be ready to support people with intellectual developmental disabilities to make their own decisions. So that's why we need a training in it, because it's very hard. Given the disability equation out of it, when it comes to making decisions, that's a hard, flawed process for us all. I bet all of you that are watching and listening and learning from today, I bet you've all made decisions that were bad, right? You've made mistakes, decisions that really made you think twice. And guess what? You probably learned from those decisions, the bad ones. It's oftentimes in our system that we take away from people with disabilities the allowance to make a decision, even if it's risky. So we're going to talk about that. Let's get into the material. So next slide, please. This is a really powerful quote from a champion of human rights, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, Stephen Taylor, wrote this quote. And this is a powerful quote when you really boil it down. Disability is not a reason for depriving any person from making the same choices other people have the right to make. And going back to the historical context, we've done this. We have, as a system, kind of, and we like to use this term, bubble wrapped, right? We've protected the heck out of people. And yes, we don't want anybody hurt. We don't want to see anybody hurt. We don't want to see somebody suffer from a bad choice. But the reality is, that's the only way human beings really learn and grow. And so if we take that incredible human freedom of being able to make your own choice away from people, I think we're doing a disservice to the people that we're there to support. So that's a powerful quote, and it really sets kind of a stage for us as to why do we even have to have a formalized training and techniques to help people make informed decisions. So let's go to the next slide. So decisions are very personal, aren't they? And they're very subjective, very subjective. When you think my decision this morning about the coffee, right, to not drink the coffee, ultimately it's probably a small decision, as opposed to, I have a friend who is facing a medical crisis, and they have to decide whether to get a pretty invasive surgery very soon so that a certain disease process doesn't continue. That's a big decision, to go for this particular surgery and to all the things that go along with any kind of medical decision you might have to make, versus my coffee decision. Come on, there's really no comparison. But we shouldn't get hung up in judging people's decisions, whether they're big or small. In our perspective, what matters is when we're helping somebody make a decision, it's their decision. It's their perspective. If the decision's a big decision, a small decision. And some of the things that they're up on the screen there, the day-to-day decisions. And I'm gonna keep coming back to the direct support professional role. That's really why I've been invited to talk mostly about that. But when we look at even things like bedtime, right? Bedtime, what does that mean? For every one of us, it's different. I've worked in settings where this is back in the 80s and 90s, there were bedtimes for people, for adults. For adults with developmental disabilities, well, at 9:30, it's bedtime. Dinner time. Imagine that? Dinner time. We had dinner time. Yeah, granted, it was 12 people living in a group home setting, and it can be kind of chaotic during any kind of meal time or time when there's transition that people are going to bed. The bottom line is, though, that's not something that really harkens to being person-centered, right? We hear a lot about being person-centered. Hopefully, if you're working for a person-centered organization or you're receiving supports from a person-centered agency or direct support professional that's person-centered, one would hope that being person-centered would respect your decision. You go to bed when you want to go to bed. Maybe you're a night owl. Maybe you like to stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning and you like to sleep into noon. Why should that be limited, or why should that be directed? And I'm here to tell you, more than not, oftentimes those kinds of things, those kind of even small day-to-day decisions are directed by somebody other than that person. That said, yes, there's big decisions, small decisions. Who ultimately decides that is the person that we're supporting. Now, the big life-defining decisions, oftentimes, even if we're a neurotypical person, if we're going to use that terminology, if we're a person, I'd rather say a person without an identified intellectual or developmental or learning disability, oftentimes we find help with making these life-defining decisions. We get advice. We seek advice. We go, oh my goodness, we are now in the age of the World Wide Web, the internet. We look for help. And whether it's a chat community, whether it's some online resource, but mostly human beings are often very open to suggestion and open to advice. Often people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, even more so. It's very interesting when you look at people that have left institutional care, if we want to even call it that, people that lived in these big places where thousands of people were kept. And when we looked at deinstitutionalization in the 80s and late 70s and 80s, and certainly the early 90s, I remember seeing people, meeting people, working with people that came from these big institutions, and they suddenly had their own refrigerator. And that was a life-defining moment for them. You know, they had their own refrigerator where they could get their own food at any time they wanted it. That was a big deal. That was a life-defining moment, right? And when I think of what we have to do as a system, I think we've got to just take a moment, take a breather. That's why this webinar is so important. What does choice mean individually for each of us? And how do we get supported in the best way to make our own decisions? And as I said, that's complicated, but we have a couple of pieces of advice and some technology to help you with that. So let's move to the next slide. More important than anything, here's the definition of what informed decision making is. And the most important thing on this whole screen is the word process. It's a process. So how this works, in informed decision making, a person supported, they get information and knowledge about an issue or a problem, right? Whatever it is. That's if you're going to help somebody, there's something at hand that has to be decided upon. It's an event to go to, it's a thing to do, it's a food to eat, it's a vacation to go on, whatever. It's infinite, the number of and the kinds of things that could be being decided upon. Again, big or small decisions, right? Second piece, with the assistance of a direct support professional or other person, doesn't have to be a direct support professional, but that's what we're talking about here. That's our role. That's what this material has been geared towards, teaching direct support professionals. How do you help that person understand the choices available to them and the outcomes possible? That's tricky. You can't let your own beliefs, your own values slip into when you're helping somebody with these elements of helping them with their decision. But that's so tricky, isn't it? We all want to give our advice. We all want to protect, we don't want anything bad to happen to people we care about. But the reality is that's not our role. We're not the protector of a person. We are the facilitator to help them with the decision-making process. And that's where helping, you might have to, as that direct support professional, you might have to go to your supervisor to help understand what resources or what choices are available for a certain type of vacation somebody wants to go on. Is there adaptive equipment available, and can, I mean, there's a million things that go in play and get put in play when it comes to free opportunities for lodging, all these, and it's not accessible. All of these things, these are all possible outcomes, right? But here's the role of us with somebody else, helping them make that decision, is helping them with the analysis of all the possible outcomes, and and what are the choices that could be available to them. The third piece of this, that person who we're supporting, has to be their choice, even if we, the supporter, in that support role, believes it's not going to be in their best interest. Short of death and really lots of blood, we have to kind of let that go. That's hard for a lot of direct support professionals. They need a knowledge base. They need a set of values, a code of ethics. They need to be competent when they're helping somebody make an informed decision, because that's what it's about. Helping somebody make an informed decision. Lots of parts and lots of play inside of a decision for any human being. Lastly, this is probably the hardest thing for us to kind of wrap our whole system around. We have to make sure that the person who's making that decision, they understand what the final final risk could be, and it's their responsibility in terms of making a decision. And this is where I think we have our struggle, because there are times when people want to do things that we might feel are not in their best interest. If we are clear with them when we're helping them understand the outcomes and the choices, the risks associated, and they understand that at their capacity and level of understanding and can feed that back to us, then the deal is done. Their decision is had. And the last thing we do is evaluate a decision. We always evaluate our decisions. My decision this morning about the coffee was a bad decision, in my opinion. I probably should have had the coffee, and I should have drank it without the milk. But the reality is, whatever the decision might be, we're always going to evaluate it. Okay? So that's the process. That's the definition of what informed decision making is. There's a lot more to it than those 4 statements, but it's a process. Okay, it's a process. Next slide, please. Here is something that's within our curriculum. We spend the whole day teaching this. I'm going to give it to you in 2 minutes, but I think it's helpful. This is a 5-step process to help somebody make their own decision. Notice what I said. How to help somebody make their own decision. Not how you make a decision for somebody, not how you influence a person, but this is almost a fail-safe system that we have created. This is a research-based, a validated way in which we can help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities make decisions. So 1, understand what's going on. What is at play? What is the decision? What's the issue? What's the situation? And with that, step 2 is gathering information in and around this situation. And the situations, it's infinite what they could be. It could be something as seemingly insignificant as what to wear. Some morning you're helping somebody choose what to wear, or it could be, I want to move from California to New York. And there's lots to gather in terms of information about an issue like that or a decision like that. Number 3 is the bulk of what we do when we're helping somebody with an informed decision, which is helping them explore options and consider outcomes, as we talked about earlier. That's tricky. We can't let our own influences creep in to ill affect somebody's personal decision. And that can happen. A quick example. We use this example in training. Say you're supporting somebody who wants to get a tattoo, and you don't believe in tattoos for whatever reasons. What'll happen is, say you don't believe in tattoos, you think they're a desecration of the human body, so be it. But you can't scare somebody like, oh, if you get a tattoo, your arm could fall off because, or your leg could fall off, or you could get infected. Oh, you shouldn't get that. See what I'm doing there? That can be very subtle. Those fear techniques, almost coercion, that is very, very common. And I don't think people are bad people in doing that. It's just, that's not step 3, which is helping people explore options and considering outcomes. You see, we have to give non-biased, neutral information to people when we're helping them make a decision. Number 4, decision time. And this is critical. It's the person that we're supporting has to make their own decision. And that word empower is there because that's what happens when somebody makes a decision for themselves. They're empowered, even if in step 5, they evaluate that decision and it's a bad decision. It turns out to be a bad outcome or a poor outcome. That's okay, because then look what happens. We go back to the beginning. We're going to try to understand the situation again, gather maybe different information, and see this 5-step decision-making process becomes almost a cycle. And it's a technique that we teach direct support professionals all throughout North America. It's very helpful, but what it does, it protects you, the professional, the clinician. Even if you're a parent, a family member, if you're using this process, it helps separate your decision from another person's decision. So that's our 5-step process. I wish we had more time to talk about it, but we have to move on. Next slide, please. There's 7 things, and I'll go through these very quickly. 7 real important questions to consider when we're helping somebody else make their own decision. What kind of decision is being made? How big is the decision? How significant is the decision? Is it a life-defining decision? Number 2, has the decision been made before by this person? Frequently, we will support people who they've made the same decision before in their life, but maybe by virtue of their disability, maybe they have a dementia process going on, a learning disability, a communication disability, whatever it might be. They might have made this decision, and they might just need to be refreshed and prompted again. Number 3, has the person been helped to understand the risks and benefits? Very important, and that has to be done without bias. That has to be done without coercion. Hard to do when we're possibly on that edge of influencing somebody. We don't want to influence people with our bias, our prejudice, our values, our beliefs. We want to make sure they understand the risks and benefits that go with their lives. How big, number 4, how big is the impact of the decision on this person's life? Again, that has to be determined between you and that person. You know, for us without any significant learning or developmental disabilities, you know, that coffee that I had this morning or didn't have this morning, that's not a huge deal. You know, for some people, that coffee in the morning, if it got ruined, could ruin their whole day. You know, how big is the impact of the decision on the person's life? We got to be careful not to judge big or small. That's in the eyes and the heart and the ears of the beholder of the decision. Number 5, how long is the person going to live with the decision? Is it, I'm going to have a headache for a couple hours if I don't have coffee. You know what? If I'm choosing to have an intimate relationship with somebody that might have something in their background that might be not beneficial to me, maybe they're known to be somebody that's exploitive, or maybe somebody that's even to the point has been an abuser of people with disabilities. That can happen in community-based settings, right? We know sometimes people are preyed upon that we support. So how long would a person live with a decision based on something like that? You see what I'm getting at? How hard would the decision be to undo? Some things are much easier to fix than others. And these seem like all very obvious questions, but these are the obvious questions that we have to have in the back of our mind as we're helping somebody else make a decision for their outcome, for their life. Number 7, to me, it's the most important. What's the least restrictive level of support that person would need. We have to free, we have to liberate people with disabilities so that they can make their own decisions and learn from their successes and from their mistakes. Huge, huge. These are huge concepts for our field. And next slide, please. This is what it's all about, and we're going to get to our panel very shortly. Experience is the teacher of all things. Largely, people with developmental intellectual disabilities in our society, we say they're experience poor. We have bubble wrapped them. We've protected them. We don't presume competence necessarily. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm not saying you who are watching or listening to this do this, but largely as a society, we don't presume competence. You see, every decision that one makes, there's an element of risk. And if we take that dignity of risk that's been talked about for decades in our field, if we take the dignity of risk away from people, we are doing a disservice and ultimately affecting a person's human rights. Next slide, please. This is funny, although it's not funny. This is kind of a metaphor, an analogy of what we've done in our system. We have protected people with disabilities. This person wants to just ride a scooter, but not in our system. See, we need to balance, right? We need to try to balance safety and risk, and then obviously provide venues for people to make their own choices, regardless of the risk, right? But no, not in our system. This is the metaphor. This is the image of what we've done. This is changing with the settings rule. This is changing. Younger families with people with loved ones with disabilities, they don't want their loved ones protected and overprotected like this. What's more rational and what we need to do more as a system is this next slide. That's the way you learn to ride a scooter. Yeah, you got some what? You got some gloves, you got a helmet, of course. This kid's gonna fall down. He's going to probably get muddy. That really cool Technicolor raincoat there, whatever it is, that's going to get muddy. Might get scraped up. Might bust his chin or her chin. But that's the way you learn to ride a scooter. That's hard for us to take in sometimes when we look at the process of helping somebody make a choice that might be risky. The easy choices about having coffee or not, I don't know. But the bigger choices in life, which direct support professionals and family members often are involved in helping people make, that's tricky business. And we have no answers. I have no specific answers. If I did, I'd be a very wealthy man. But what we do have is what we just talked about. We've got that 5-step decision-making process, and we've got, I think, a world where we're seeing people with disabilities more respected in the fact that they have the capacity, they have the competence with the right support to make their own decisions. So that's my presentation. Let's get to the panelists, if we may. Yeah, there we go. And I'd like to introduce, I'm going to introduce everybody, and if everybody can come on the screen, I guess that's what we're going to do here. Wonderful. All right. Let me start with Jenna. If you could introduce yourself and a little tiny bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jenna. I've been part of Teachers Explored for the last 8 years. I'm also a self-advocate, and I receive supported living services.
Great, great. Thank you for being here, Jenna. Let's go to Kavita.
I am Kavita, and I am an ally, first of all, with an organization called Pragna that supports neurodiverse individuals. And I am the mother of a beautiful 16-year-old daughter who is neurodiverse, has autism, and a comorbidity of a seizure disorder.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's go with Trey.
Hey everyone, my name is Trey. I am with Futures Explored. I have been a DSP for 9 years and assisted with making decisions every day for our folks.
Great, thank you, Trey. And last but certainly not least, Michael.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Pereira. I'm the Executive Director of Alacosta Centers, a service provider in Berkeley, California. We provide after-school services for school-age kids or students, and we have an adult community-based day program for those over. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Glad you're all here. And so what we're going to do here is just have a discussion. We're going to make this conversational. There's no right or wrong answers. I've got a couple questions that'll guide us, but I'm gonna point, or not point. I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna ask individuals to answer some queries. So I'd like to start, if that's okay. I'd like to start with Jenna.
Yes.
So Jenna, I kind of went, really quick to go through what informed decision making is, and I think most importantly, you're a person that is receiving supports. What does informed decision mean to you personally?
So as I said before, I live on my own. I have staff that come in and help me. So informed decision making means that I get to make my decisions on how I live my life or how I do things, but I also get to learn from my mistakes, being my own person.
Mistakes. Have you ever made a mistake?
I'm sure off the top of my head, but yes.
You're right, Jenna. That's largely how human beings learn, by messing up and learning. So, and we can't do that if we don't allow for that, right? So, thank you. Kavita, as a parent, as an ally, I'd like to know what informed decision making this process means for you.
I'll answer that question as an ally. It just means that I'm empathizing with the individual and putting myself in their shoes and helping them arrive at what's going to make them happy. That's the most important thing. And as a parent, honestly, informed decision making and empowering my child to be able to make her own decisions means that I can exhale, I can breathe more than anything else. Because the biggest fear as a parent is that I cannot die. And I think informed decision making allows me that peace of mind to be able to know that she's going to be okay if she has the power and she has the ability to make her own decisions. That's what it is.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot there. That's a lot there. And there's the one word you said is empathy, right? Empathy, to have empathy. And I know direct support professionals, that's one of the important things that they use. So I'm going to go to Trey next. So Trey, what does informed decision making mean to you in your daily role as a direct support professional?
Just giving the person that I'm supporting all the information they need to make that decision, whether good or bad, and how, what repercussions could come from that decision. But also, standing by their side and supporting them through it. And so, like in Jenna's case, letting them make that mistake so they can learn from it also.
Yeah. Let me ask just a quick follow-up, and I want to go to Michael, but have you struggled with that over the years? Like, oh no, this is going to turn out terrible. Have you had that experience, and how have you
Yeah,
coped
I
with
have.
that?
I was education support for about 8 years, and I would have students that, they need to complete a quiz, but they don't do it on time, or they need to read a chapter in their textbook and they don't. So just giving them the information as to this may happen, and then as they're not doing that, kind of just sitting back and letting them see what actions or what repercussions came from their actions.
Got it. No, thank you. That's so well said. Michael, as a person that administers organization, right? So you have, you've got to deal with the worries of liability and exposure, all that kind of thing. What do you, when you hear informed decision making, what goes on in your head? as the perspective of an executive director?
That's a good question, John. I think, I want to echo what Jenna and Kavita and Trey had said. I mean, really, even as a service provider, even looking at things through the lens of liability, and all of the things that have to do with, like, I guess the skeleton of a program is, to me, second nature to what we should be doing is prioritizing someone's ability to make choices for themselves and providing a framework for which that can happen safely. And so, if people are going to really be well equipped to make those decisions, we're going to start on things that are perhaps small to that individual versus some of these larger, bigger ones. I noticed in the chat there were questions about that I think Trey answered and addressed related to like conservatorship or, challenges with different types. The role that I have as a service provider is to provide an avenue to facilitate informed decision making to be happening actively, constantly. And that's the best way to do it, because I really do believe that if you're truly going to be honoring person-centeredness, if you're really truly going to be promoting the notion of self-advocacy, you need to provide a haven where dignity of risk and the cost of failure can happen in a small, safe environment. And so that's the lens in which I look at this, and why I believe that informed decision-making is critical, not just to the way that services should be rendered, but in the way that we should be promoting the notion of respect for every individual that's being served. Thanks, John.
No, thank you, Michael. Thank you for being frank and honest. It kind of leads into the next question or the next inquiry. So, and I think we'll go in a little different order, if it's okay. Kavita, how do you manage the balance, right, of self-determination, obviously of your loved one, and the possible conflicts of your wishes as a parent? And I guess let's stick with the parent role. How do you do that balance, self-determination, and oh man, I don't like what's about to happen?
I think by coming to terms with the fact that I don't know it all, and that she is her own person and I'm my own person, and knowing that that at the end of the day, okay, the reason this ties into my allyship is because we have an ally support program that we've developed, which helps us practice mindfulness and humility on a daily basis. So the humility to understand that I could be wrong, that even as a mom, that she's able to, whatever she is doing, there is a reason that she's trying to communicate that she wants to do something on her own. Understanding that and just coming to terms with that and transcending my own ego that, oh, I'm the mom, so I know best. That is where I guess, you kind of have to strike that you understand that, okay. And I learned this a little late. I deal with it every single day because she's a pretty feisty 16-year-old. So as all 16-year-olds are, but that's something that really helps in striking the balance. I think, being mindful of the fact that this individual is their own individual. And as with every living being who deserves dignity and respect in this world for their existence, I think understanding that helps bring things into perspective with regard to balance.
Thank you. And I think it has nothing to do with disability, our concerns about our loved ones. Yes, I mean, sure, there's aspects of a disability that we might be focusing on, but it's more about it's our child, it's our brother, it's our sister, it's our mother, and there's different dynamics there, right? Different dynamics, but no, that's actually good advice. Thank you. Jenna, how about you balancing, even just for yourself, this goes for anybody, but for you, Jenna, balancing your self-determination with what might be risky in your life? How do you balance?
So I have an example of something that I've dealt with in that context. Before I moved out on my own, I was living in a group home, And my grandmother did not want me to move out on my own because she was concerned for my safety. However, I was working with the company that I'm with already, and they were getting me ready to make those choices safely. So I was able to ease my grandma's concern, and she was eventually okay with me living on my own. So.
A quick follow-up. So you had to take energy to help grandma be chill.
Yeah, she was not chill. We argued all the time.
So it's so interesting, right? You know, and you probably in your, I would assume you felt, look, I want to go. I want my own world, man. But I would imagine. So look at you had a double duty to make sure your grandma was cool, but to also make sure your dreams were kind of fulfilled.
Yeah, but I was prepared.
Yeah, interesting, right? I think we need to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to think about that. And when we're helping somebody make a decision, they shouldn't have to be worrying about our feelings, you know,
Yeah.
especially with a life decision like that, moving up. Thank you, Jenna. Trey, in your role, and you probably, if anybody's going to see this and have this balance act right in their face, it's the direct support professional. Have you had situations where you've had to balance self-determination and risk?
Yeah, I have. And just even on some of the day-to-day decisions, like you were earlier saying that we sometimes take for granted, you know, I've been out in the community with participants and they wanted to watch a certain movie that was rated R, and, you know, mom and dad find out and, oh no, you're not old enough to watch that movie. And then I would just talk with my participant. Okay, this is what you may see. This is what it's rated, you know, and then give them that choice that, you know, I can do this. And sometimes in certain situations, when it comes to conservatorship, you know, just making sure that if it's a really drastic decision, that you're supporting everyone to support the person making that decision. You know, sometimes having those planning team meetings or doing a group phone call or a group email, just so everyone's on board with what decisions being made and how everyone can kind of collaborate and jump in with that.
Great. Yeah. And who said direct support is an entry-level occupation? That's high skill stuff, man. That's hard stuff, right? Thank you.
John, might I add on that? I'd like to add
please,
what Trey
Michael.
said.
Michael.
So when you're trying to find a balance, and that's always the key, and that's the key to any really positive approach that you want to do, that you want to take with helping support people, no matter what your vocation is. You know, it's really predicated on the ability for you to develop good rapport and relationships with people so that you can get quality information so that you know what areas are going to be more troublesome, what areas are covered by certain legal constraints. And for me, in my organization, that starts off, quite frankly, in intake, you know, to kind of explain that our programs are going to be utilizing the informed decision-making framework as an interactional process with our staff. And that folds into what we would do during our annual review process. That's why I wanted to piggyback off what Trey said, because those are formal situations where you may not have as many, you know, kind of day-to-day contact with folks that are supporting this person or involved in this person's life, with the caveat being that it should still be looked at through the lens of the person who's receiving the service. And I think that's, to be fair, an adjustment that I think our organization has struggled with at times, if I'm being honest. But that is an area that we're striving to get better at, because if the person is at the center of what we're trying to serve, then their decision-making and their process about how to do that begins with something that happens every day and happens when we have these formal kind of discussions. And that's how balance is acquired. Balance isn't acquired by one event. Balance is acquired over time. And as skills grow and needs change, because that's true for who we serve. How they present at certain age isn't the same. Jenna didn't have the same needs she had at 6 or 7 as she has now as an adult. That's just different. And we have to respect that process. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael. You nailed it. We got time for one more question for each, and then we're going to go on to questions from our community, from our audience. Man, I could do this all day with you guys. This is fun. How about this one? How much risk is too much risk when it comes to making decisions? And I think this goes for, I mean, for individually, just as a human, but in the role of a direct support professional, in each of your kind of your positions on this panel. And let's start with you, Jenna. How risky do you do things? Do you make people's hair curl like your grandma?
So no, I'm actually a very responsible person, so I try not to. But I do believe that people have the right to make their own decisions. But if it comes to physical harm or somebody else being harmed, that's when somebody should be able to step in.
Mm-hmm. And how powerful should somebody step in? I mean, what's the level of stepping in? You know.
Well, if someone's physically getting hurt, I would think that somebody would want to step in all the way to help.
Yep. It's interesting though.
Minor things, I don't think that's necessary.
Yep. I think direct support professionals struggle with that sometimes, you know, when we're supporting people that might have really strong personalities and, you know, might be a little aggressive, but that might be the way they approach the world. And you know, when do we put our hands on? When do we leave our? I don't know, but it's a judgment call every time, right? Good. Kavita, what about you? How much risk is too much risk for your loved one?
You know, the honest answer to that is I don't know, because every situation is so different. And, you know, regardless of how much I could talk till the, you know, cows come home kind of thing about how empowered we need to make someone feel, and how I think at the end of the day, as a mom, or as a parent, you're always worried about every single decision, right? From the moment you let her walk out the door to just cross the street, getting out of the car, depending upon the, you know, does she know it's safe to not run into, I mean, you know, in the parking lot, do they know their boundaries and how exactly to do that? But, you know, a certain amount of the risk that we need to take is that unless we risk that opportunity for them, they are never going to learn. We would never learn what they're capable of. And you know, there was a thing that happened when she was 5 years old. She used to elope. Can I share that incident?
Sure.
So she had this tendency to run. I mean, literally elope, and she was a fast one. I mean, she would just take off, and it would be so hard for us to get a hold of her. And I was constantly, like, literally everybody, I would never let go of her hand anytime we were out. And my husband's an overprotective one too, and he used to do the same thing. So there was, you know, realization dawned when my mother, with whom she was perfectly, they would communicate. My daughter is not very functionally verbal. So, but then with her grandma, she was perfectly having conversations, and, you know, they were completely at ease with each other. So there was this one time I had to go take a meeting, and my mom wanted to go to the mall, and she was in a wheelchair. She was on a scooter. And she said, oh, you know what? No worries. She was supposed to watch her, just drop us off. And then at the mall, I'm like, no, she's going to elope. But what if you lose her? You can't run. You can't walk. So how are you going to do this? And I had this whole full-blown meltdown, a full-grown adult. I had the meltdown, but she said, don't worry about it. We're going to be fine. Drop us off at the AMC movie theaters and we'll handle it. And guess what? 3 hours later, I was sweating, figuring out, oh my God, I've not got a call from her. What's going on? And I rushed back from the meeting, like about 2.5 hours later. I left early. And what do we see? My mom is going on her scooter. My daughter, who would not sit still for one moment, is walking quietly beside her, and the two of them are talking to each other right along the whole away, and there's absolutely nothing going on which I feared would have happened by then. And that's when I realized that it's all about the faith that you put in the person, and about communication at the end of the day. Just because we know we use language to communicate and they don't, doesn't mean that they're any less or they understand us any less. So I think that judgment perspective that comes in even as a parent with regard to this actually makes things more risky. So I don't know if it totally made sense, but I felt that would have been a huge risk that I was taking. I felt it was a huge risk that my mom was taking by taking her out into the community by herself. But at the end of the day, she knew that she had faith in her granddaughter. So I think I hope that answered your question.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We are little behind schedule. And Michael and Trey, I wanted to give you one final word each about this. What's too much risk as an exec, as a direct support professional? Do you have a limit? Let's go, Michael, you first.
Actually, let's let Trey go first, because I think people will want to hear from someone who's providing direct service regularly, and then
Go Trey.
All right. So I think too much risk would just be, are they going to be, the action or the repercussion of their action is, are they going to be in a situation where they're in harm or they're hurt, or another person is in harm and hurt? And that can also be in a financial duress situation, right? But part of our job as a DSP is, what is the risk here? What is it that this person wants to do? And us as a DSP ask them questions, and us asking them questions, why do you want to do this? Who would be there? And help them plan to mitigate some of that risk that could be involved, And so as we are helping them by making an informed decision, it's our job to get as much information from them as we can to make that informed decision in a safe manner, especially like in Kavita's case, where there is a child going out on their own, or a child going maybe with a group of friends. Get as much information as the place they're going, and stranger danger training, things like that, to let them know that, what to do in case something happens.
Great, thank you.
Similarly, Trey, again, I'm really appreciate you bringing it up, because I think what I mentioned before from an administrative perspective or an organizational perspective is, again, to provide that framework for risk to happen, because dignity of risk is super important. And like how people judge the amount of it is going to vary, right? So my responsibility is to put those guardrails on in terms of what we're determining to be health and safety. So for example, if you're serving somebody with Prader-Willi, we're not necessarily going to lock all of our cabinets up because they may be eating. We're going to be hopefully engaging that person to let them know about what the consequences are, about why they should or should not be eating said food. It's a little more, obviously these are blanket statements and they're not applicable to everybody who we serve. But the point is that you're trying to be able to create a space where, if the risk is doing something to violate a person's health or safety or that of who's around them, then that's where kind of the line has to start to be drawn. And unfortunately, unless there's something really hardcore like brandishing a weapon or something like that, which is very, very rare and infrequent. But my point is, you're trying to be able to create, again, the guardrails so that you can provide opportunities for people to learn equitably. I think it's the best way I know how to frame it. Thanks, John. And I appreciate everybody on the panel.
Thank you. Panelists, Jenna, Kavita, Trey, and Michael, thank you. We could talk for hours. We have to be quiet now because the next segment. So Will, I believe,
Yep.
Do we have some questions? Hi, Will.
Hi, John. You guys were phenomenal. Great panel as far as I have one question. I'm hoping, John, you can take 2 minutes at, and then I have one that's sort of the big, I'll call it elephant in the room question that I like the panelists to try and take at least a shot at. So one question that came a lot was for folks who have very limited experience in making decisions or present with limited communication skills or unknown communication skills, how does the process work for them, in the soundbite short version?
Yep, I can take that, and everybody else, please take a shot at it too. It's no different in terms of that process. It's no different. You go perhaps slower. This is what I learned in social work school. I'm a social worker. I think the one thing I learned, you meet people where they're at. And when you meet people where they're at, you take their cues, whether that cue is an eye wink, if it's some kind of grimace, whatever it might be. Here's one, and I know Trey knows this. We get to know people very, very well, especially people that don't use typical forms of communication, because most of the communication in which that human beings work, how we communicate with each other is mostly not with words. We have two beautiful, wonderful interpreters that are doing ASL with us. I mean, they're not using words. I don't understand ASL, but my goodness, the people are communicating. People communicate. You cannot not communicate. And I think as a soundbite answer would be, use the same process. Explore, help. What's the issue? Gather the information, explore the options and the resources with that person, have them ultimately in their capacity, in their level of ability, make their own choices. And you might need extra support with that. But go.
So John, just to supplement what you're saying, I kind of alluded to this in an answer I put into the Q&A as well. What we need to do is not only meet people where we're at, but give them the tools to be able to do so, right? So processing super important, latency period for speech is important. Understanding how people receive information is important. But then making sure that they're equipped with the tools to do so is also important. But just to underscore what John had said, the 5-step process is the process. I mean, that is what the heart of it is. And if you're doing a good job of gathering information, sharing that information in the most appropriate manner for that person, and allowing them to, again, make some assessment or judgment about how best they want to go and provide a place for them to take that chance, then you're doing informed decision making and you're participating in that process, and that person is now granted the opportunity to learn actively. With the support person around them.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? Yeah. Just because my daughter is also not what you would call reliably functionally verbal. But at the same time, I also work with individuals who are nonverbal or don't use language. There's so many there's technology, there's AAC devices, there is, we do the letter boards, and you can write down choices for them. Sometimes it's as simple as just looking at the different options, and there's dream boards that you can build. There's so many different ways. Sometimes some of them communicate through art. They could paint when they're in a certain frame of mind. You could tell, and like you said, you cannot not communicate. You can tell from that spark in their eye and the glisten. I mean, when they smile, how their face lights up, how their face falls, everything. I mean, I guess just being mindful and empathetic more than anything else drives your communication with the individual.
Excellent.
And I think real quick, just to piggyback on what Kavita said too, is also waiting for that person's response. I know I've seen it a lot of times as DSP is we'll ask a question and then we don't wait enough time before we ask another question and then ask another question. So just taking the time to, for one, know that individual, how they communicate, but also waiting for them to respond, to process what you just said so they can somehow communicate with you, and that, like I said, just giving them time.
Yeah. Oh, so powerful. That's right, Trey. Real quick, this is not a plug or anything. This book has changed the way I've done direct support over the years. It's a book by our friend in Canada, Dave Hingsberger. It's it's 35 pages, and it's called First Contact: Charting Inner Space. And it's all about how do we connect with folks they have just very profound intellectual communication disabilities. And there's some wonderful things in here. You can find it, I don't know where you can find it, at Amazon. I don't know. I'm not trying to sell the book, but it's an amazing book dealing with exactly what we were just talking about. So great.
Okay,
Yeah.
guys, I'm going
Yep.
to try and drop one quick question in there. Of course, this one's going to take us 14 hours to talk about. So Jenna, as we think about re-engagement in the community, one of the big concerns out there is obviously the opportunity to get vaccinated. How are you sort of approaching your informed decision of making about getting the vaccine or not, or what you want your direct service staff to have related to that? How are you sort of looking at that?
So I'm getting in, my staff and my supervisor in my supported living is giving me informed information about the vaccines and things like that. And as soon as I can, I will be getting the vaccine because I'm tired of this. So
Okay, Kavita.
Yeah.
As a parent, what are you thinking about in trying to help make that decision?
I've been talking to her and done social stories about the coronavirus itself. Especially, we had to do that because we needed to get her to understand why it's important to wear masks, not to take it off, and with regard to the sanitizer. She's not eligible for a vaccine yet. She's not 16 yet, so we haven't crossed that bridge, or we haven't come to that yet. So we're trying to. For the individuals who are eligible, who are her peers in high school, some kids who are 18 now, we have been preparing stories about the coronavirus and how one of the ways to stay safe is by getting the vaccine. Any resource available out there, we would love to find out more as to how exactly. I'd love to hear from the DSPs as to how they're developing communication with regard to why it's important to get the vaccine.
I'm going to go to Mike next, and Trey, you'll get the final word on this one.
Oh, great. Thanks. Actually, it's interesting. When you're looking through the lens of vaccination and looking at it from an organizational perspective, it's a little bit different than being able to look at it through an individual like Jenna or a parent who's trying to give information to her daughter, Kavita's daughter, or Trey, even as an employee of a place that's honoring that. But I'll be candid. I mean, the process for us to make a determination about what to do is no different than the 5-step process that informed decision-making holds. And if there's one thing that I want to share with the audience is that this is not a practice that is specific for this community. This is an approach about how to make decisions on a large scale, like it is for vaccination administration for an organization, as it is for someone who's making an individual choice. So the options are still the same, or the steps are still the same. I'm trying to understand the decision and the issue and the situation from a variety of areas, from a variety of perspectives. Trying to gather as much information about all of those things and about what the consequences are about having something that's mandatory or something that's a choice-driven option for who we employ and who we serve. Exploring all the options and considering what those outcomes will be. So once you do that, then you're able to equip yourself to make the best decision possible, and something that I know that the service community in the East Bay is talking about actively, because there's a lot of nuance to decisions about this on a larger scale. And what decisions that we make have an impact upon Trey as an employee of that organization, and certainly for Kavita as a parent, and most importantly for a self-advocate as well, or someone like Jenna. Involving stakeholders to gather information and also, other peers and colleagues is super important as you kind of embark on that. But I guess circling back to what we're doing here, that process still exists, and it's a worthwhile process to go through so that you can make the most informed decision that you can, as what I would do for the 100 and so families that I serve, and the 50 employees that are under my charge. So that's sort of the way that I'm looking at this, and without getting into too many wonky details, that's the purpose of this process and why it holds value and has generality to anything that we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So Trey, what are your sort of wrapping thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, just like Michael said, informed decision making isn't just within the IDD community. It's something that all of us need help with, you know. But when it comes to vaccines and things like that, just giving our folks the information about the vaccines and, you know, what the side effects are, where they can get the vaccine, but also do it in a way that's very unbiased, that you're not telling them they need to be vaccinated. You're not giving your opinion about the vaccine. You're just giving them the information. Hey, if you want to get vaccinated, this is what the effects are. This is what you do. And if you don't want to get vaccinated, that's okay too. But this is, you know, why it's beneficial, especially at this time during the pandemic. So really just keeping your opinion out of it and giving them the information that they're looking for.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm going to bring Barry Giardini back to close out. You guys were awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And really special thanks to John for his wonderful presentation and overview on informed decision making. And then to our panelists, Jenna, Kavita, Trey, and Michael. You all did a great job really personalizing this and providing your perspective. So thank you for the robust conversation. I know we went a little bit over time, so thank you everyone for a little bit of grace on that. I do want to share with everyone just a few of the resources from the Disability Thrive Initiative. First and foremost, want to make sure I highlight the Lunch and Learn this Friday, March 12th from noon to 1 p.m. You can register at lunchandlearn.disabilitythriveinitiative.org. That's going to be a great opportunity for us to continue this conversation on informed decision making. John from NADSP will be there to join us and continue the conversation. So we do hope to see you there. We also have this webinar will be up on our resource library on our website. There you can also sign up for email updates or request technical assistance. So please do visit the website, disabilitythriveinitiative.org. And please be sure to mark your calendars for our next webinar, which will be on Wednesday, March 24th. And we will continue the conversation about vaccinations in our community. And the webinar is on gaining COVID-19 vaccine knowledge and support strategies to use during alternative services. So we hope to see you all there. We hope you've all enjoyed today's presentation. Again, thank you so much for our presenters, our panelists, and John from NADSP. And we will see you soon and hopefully on Friday. Thank you so much. Take care.